I would like to welcome you all to the second session of Soteria's Climate Resilient Dialogues, which will be focusing on the topic from risk to solutions, science-driven policy and innovation for bridging the protection gap. I'm very happy to introduce you our two speakers. So our first speaker is Jaroslav Bizaik. He is a principal scientist for the European Mediterranean Center on Climate Change and also the project coordinator of NATURANCE project and involved in PIISA project. So PIISA and NATURANCE are our Soteria sister project, and we are hosting this climate resilient dialogues in collaboration with them. Then we have our second speaker, Wouter van Nieuwil. He is a climate change adaptation expert for the European Environmental Agency. And today I will be hosting this session and we're presenting Global Infrastructure Basel Foundation. We are one of the consortium partners of Soteria project, and we are in charge of hosting the climate resilient dialogues. Today's agenda will look as follows. I will give you a small introduction to Soteria project for the people that are new, and also an introduction to the climate resilient dialogues. Afterwards, Wouter will give us an overview of the key reports of the European Environmental Agency. He will touch upon the report of State and Outlook for 2025, but also the climate risk assessments, the Just Resilience report, and the report on monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. After this, we will give you some time to ask about questions, but also feel free to post questions in the chat in the meanwhile. And then I will give the floor to Jaroslav on the innovative solutions analyzed in NATURANCE and PIISA project, with the emphasis on nature-based and parametric insurance schemes. Also here you have the possibility to ask some additional questions. So very short on Soteria project. Soteria project is an European Horizon research project focusing on insurance products for climate adaptation. And our project is looking at different best practices on data sharing, on enabling policy for insurance for climate adaptation. We are testing different innovative insurance products in different regions. So we are focusing on 8 regions throughout Europe. And we are also very much focusing on shaping a community of practice. And the climate resilient dialogues are part of it, where we try to bring experts around the table and give them insights of the latest development of the protection gap, but also on innovative insurance solutions to fight climate change. And the very first session that we did was focusing on this protection gap and also gave an introduction on the European Commission Climate Resilient Dialogues. And today we'll following up on this. So you will also see that Wouter and Jaroslav will give more insights on the protection gap. And we will focus today very much on risks and the solutions that we can give for those risks. So I would like first to give Wouter the floor for the presentation on the different key reports of the European Environment Agency.
Good morning, Amanda. Sorry, there was a microphone issue for a second, and thank you very much for the introduction. I will start sharing my screen, which is the easiest. But in the meantime, I'm indeed Wouter van Nieuwil, working for the European Environment Agency, which is one of the decentralized agencies of the European Union. And I'm going to focus on some of the key workflows that we are working on, some of them resulting in products relatively recently, like the European Climate Risk Assessment that officially came out beginning of the year, and some others that are in the pipeline and that are coming, but where the workflow itself and the input that creates the final product is for the moment already ongoing and has some information that might be of relevance for practitioners. So yeah, we are one of the oldest decentralized agencies. We exist already for 30 years. If there is a little bit of light, even in the evening, that's how the building in Copenhagen looks like. So that's why it's a decentralized one. We are a knowledge and a data provider. And on the moment that we were created, the keywords that were put at the back of our business cards, we don't have them anymore these days, but those days 30 years ago were that we want to be trustworthy and forward-looking. And that stayed with us, luckily, throughout all these 30 years.
Wouter, may I ask you to make your screen a bit bigger on the presentation modes? Okay.
Oh, wait, what do I? It's not in presentation mode, or what do you mean?
No, so on the big screen, because now we see it quite a bit smaller.
Okay, I'm afraid that I will have to reshare because I don't know what went wrong there.
Okay, then we will continue like this. That's now.
Yeah. So I share my screen. Is this is it better or is it the same?
You need to switch to presentation mode, please.
I see that it is not working, so let's continue like this. Thank you, Wouter. No problem.
I'm going to give it one more try by moving it physically as a presentation to my different screen. Who knows what that gives as a difference? And my sincere apologies for this. What is this saying?
Thank you so much.
It's not much better. Okay.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay. Good. And yeah, so for a very long time, we also had a delivery model, and our new delivery model says very much what we do. We work on reporting, which means data coming in, all kinds of official data that are reported on environment, on climate, on sustainability. We work, of course, a lot with data. We transform data into knowledge via all kinds of assessments, but we are also a networking organization where, together with the agency, a whole country network was created that officially meets next to our management board and so on, but a network that is really a co-creation network. That's enough about who we are, because that means that, for example, we are not a funding agency and so on. We also normally don't describe ourselves as really a hardcore research organization, but we describe ourselves as being an integrator, an organization that creates added value by bringing a lot of information together from all kinds of levels of input. That can be all kinds of case studies from the local, the regional, the national level. Of course, these national data, research networks we are involved in, projects we collaborate with, input we get via our scientific committee and so on. So we really believe that there is an added value in bringing existing knowledge together and trying to reformulate that and to make it useful for more different people. And that is probably one of the main aims of the State and Outlook of the Environment in Europe report. It is, from a content perspective, our only mandatory thing we have to do. Every 5 years, we have to provide that overview. So the next one will be in 25, published during the Danish presidency. So it's it's a home game in that sense. And the overarching narrative will be from, where is Europe going to? What is our journey towards sustainability and the different aspects of it? but also to put that in a global context. And I think also for adaptation, that is becoming more and more important and interesting, that it's not just looking at your own location, but also looking what the inputs are from outside. And in our case, that means what is going on in the rest of the world, impacting Europe. And probably one of the most important ones is that integrated narrative, connecting the dots. And for every one of you working on adaptation, that must sound very familiar, because in most cases, that is what you have to do as well. You're not just looking at making sure that one single aspect of a system or one single sector is getting more resilient. No, you're looking at the context. How is that spatially organized? What else do I have to? And of course, we can continue to repeat that there are a lot of problems. Our emissions are not decreasing. Whatever we said, our water is not getting cleaner, despite all the promises made in the past, and so on and so on. But nevertheless, the SOER wants to focus on responses and solutions. So for the moment, everything is brought together. We very soon will have a member state consultation. And it's also not something that we write with just a few colleagues in Copenhagen. It's also something that we create together with that AONet network, our country network. So all 38 of them, because it's more than the EU27, the 38 countries that are member or cooperating are also writing their national fact sheets to complement. So that is something coming up, and I think there are two elements that are really resonating with us working on adaptation, and that is that connecting the dots and not in isolation, both thematically but also in a geographical, in a spatial context. Good. Of course, it's a whole range of products, mainly digital. The synthesis report, trying to bring everything together. It's again not new research in the strict sense that we're creating a lot of new products outside of what we do, but it is bringing together all the regular work that is done on water, on air quality, on adaptation, on mitigation, on sustainability, on finance, and so on, and especially focusing on the overlaps, on connecting the dots. There will be thematic ones, and the country space, that is where our network is mainly working on. A lot of attention is going into stakeholder engagement, and we take stakeholder engagement very serious. And President of the previous and future European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in the State of the Union, made already clear that the implementation of the European Green Deal will require more intensive dialogues with many more key stakeholders. She mentioned the industry, of course, but she also mentioned the citizens of Europe. And we take that stakeholder engagement very serious, always keeping in mind that there are so many different levels. And a lot of co-creation, a lot of real collaboration is not easy, and it takes time, but it really improves your outputs. So there are groups where we will just notify them. They will see the publications, they will see these things. There were many more that will be informed, that will know it in advance, including all kinds of journalists and so on. But the real interesting part starts from the consultation onwards up to the empowerment. And that is why a whole range of stakeholder engagement activities with different groups, but also in different countries, with different thematic groups. So not only with industry, with countries, with regions, with the Commission, of course, a very important partner, the Council and the Parliament, but also thematically from first, let's see what we have on adaptation, on sustainable finance. That is all going on for the moment. So that's upcoming, and yeah, it's only once in 5 years that we can do such an effort. The previous one is from 2020, and honestly, 2020 means that it's all written and published way before COVID. We're living in a different world for the moment, so I'm at least very much looking forward to the 25 version. And sometimes people ask, yeah, okay, but the problems remain the same. Is that so necessary to have a new state and outlook? Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary, just even beyond the mandate or the legal obligation we have from a content perspective to make that update of an overview document connecting the dots. Another flagship report, so it's not written in our legislation that we have to do it, but if there's one flagship report from the last years that the agency has created, then it's what we call EUCRA. And EUCRA is the European Climate Risk Assessment. It's the first of its kind, published in 2024. It's very likely to be repeated in EUCRA 2. For the moment, tentatively foreseen for 2028, so we will have more time to work on that to further elaborate what is in, because all in all, this was a relatively fast and quick exercise. And there's also a potential that it will be in the revision of the EU climate law. That's a potential. It's not voted. It's the parliament having the final say on that. But that will make this a mandate for Europe to provide that information. Many of you will, of course, have more detailed information that they use at certain times. But one of the things we feel that always is important is to balance that level of detail with comparability, with having information that is very specific and that you have for a country, for a region, for a specific sector, or even for a group of specific assets you're working on, to know in detail what those risks are. And that, at the other hand, you have that overarching information that is needed to have an equal level playing field. And that's what EUCRA tries to do. EUCRA does not try to be the most detailed risk assessment for every asset in Europe. That's simply, well, that's impossible, and will never be possible. But what Europe tries to do is to have that first European overview, combining not just the climate risks and what the non-climatic drivers are, but also looking at the policy horizons, what the policy readiness is, and who is the owner. And I will come back to some of these elements in a minute. So yeah, Europe's climate is changing rapidly. That's of course one of the basic inputs to work with, the observed and projected trends for different regions in Europe, and what then the key climatic risk drivers are in this region. So that's the first part of the exercise. The climate is changing rapidly. What do we observe already, and what are the trends in our different models? The second one is then looking at, what are the climate-related hazards, but what are also the non-climatic risk drivers on population, on technology, all kinds of environmental issues as well, including waste, LULUCF, and the whole carbon cycle thing, and to have then an overview of what these climate-related hazards and these non-climatic drivers, how they directly and indirectly impact 5 key systems that we defined. Ecosystems, everything which is our natural environment, our biodiversity, our nature, our ecosystems, everything which is related to water in most adaptation-related issues, one of the key elements. Looking at food and agriculture, infrastructure, health, and then the economy and finance. So that were the clusters where EUCRA then looks at the links between the drivers and the risks resulting in these clusters. And in the end, and I will go in a minute to more details, including even the legend, in the end, it came up with 36 key risks to look at with an urgency to act over these 5 different clusters, where urgent action is needed, which are the purple ones, the most urgent ones, sometimes even specific for certain parts of Europe, mainly the south, which is a hot spot when it comes to climate risks, until a few elements where watching brief is for the moment sufficient. There's no immediate action needed, but it's something to look at for the future to make sure that we don't act too late, and that on the moment that the time is there, we know at least what is going on. And you can see in all 5 of these clusters, there are at least some purple ones, which means that there is no cluster where there's no urgent action needed. Good. I promise to go a little bit into more detail without reading it, but that gives you then an idea what is in that overview graph. So it's from coastal ecosystems until winter tourism, looking at infectious diseases. So 36 key risks or major climate risks for Europe that are then assessed. Why was that important? That's important because I said in the beginning, we're not just looking at those climate risks, but we also want to see what the policy readiness is and who is responsible to act. Because there's very little, and that is most probably something that you also have to face in day-to-day work, whatever sector, whatever level, geographically level you're working on. It's very seldom that something is really owned by one party or by one responsible. And as you can see in the last column, there are a few places where it says this is really an EU competence or this is a country level competence. But in most cases, to develop action to make sure that policies are adapted or in place, there is a co-ownership on who needs to act, which also means that coordination, collaboration, and working together is absolutely needed. So that is done for all of these sectors. This is just the example for the infrastructure being one of the 5. This is done for all of the different ones, and it's then in the end, the urgency to act here that gives the final star-shaped or whatever form it is. I don't have a good word for that. Graph with the 36 risks. Now, it's not just that there is collaboration needed between different levels. When we think about climate change adaptation and these risks and our resilience and increasing our future resilience, the first thing we can do is forgetting the idea that by changing our environment policies, this will be done, or by just looking at our civil protection policies, this will be done. No, there are so many policy areas. And here, of course, we looked at it at the EU policy areas, the way they are split and the way they are exposed. But you can also simply read them as teams, as kind of, it's more than sectors, it's more teams than sectors that are exposed and that probably need to be thought about. Also, if you're working subnational in a region or trying to work cross-boundary and so on. So of course, environment is one of them. No doubt about that, but it impacts almost all teams you can think about and you're having policies about, including fisheries, tourism, civil protection, and so on, going to the single market policies, the free movement of goods. So these kind of pretty basic things of the whole construction of the EU we live in nowadays. So it's not a climate and environment thing to be solved. This is really cross-cutting, and that's the only way forward if it comes to solutions. A little bit more detail, EUCRA for each, for 8 thematic fact sheets created then a whole impact chain, trying to describe more detail. I only give one of them, which is the one on water security. Sorry, the video, the camera was just on top of it, and I wasn't 100% sure which one I selected. But they're also on terrestrial ecosystems, the marine, health, energy. So there are 8 thematic fact sheets that have these impact change described in a specific chapter. And then they are complemented by storylines. A lot of information is out there. And as I said, we seldom do really new research from scratch, but we try to bring things together. So it's not that the information is not available at all. The question is, does it reach people? So very important, in addition to the fact sheets, is that there are storylines where we explain certain things in a different way, using the same information, same scientific quality. That's not what it is about, but to make sure that people understand how things are impacting them, how things are impacting where they are living, their economy, their environment, their biodiversity. So that is done, for example, looking at large-scale flooding, infectious diseases, but also disruption of supply chain. And there's also one on the stability of financial markets and public finances, because some of these events, think for example about the Slovenian flood in 2023, time flies, it's maybe not the biggest event in absolute values, but related to the GDP, this is really substantial for a country. So that has an impact on, public finances and the stability. I think that's about EUCRA. It's a very big report, 400 N pages, but luckily there's a summary that explained quite a lot of the basics, and then you can use, well, of course, if you want to read the whole thing, that's fine, but if you start with the summary, you can then jump into the full report to or the thematic fact sheets, or the part of the risks and the clusters, or the storylines that then you need and select those rather than going from page 1 until 400, and I even forgot how many, but it's not 401, it's closer to the 500 than to the 400 reading those. Good. Just resilience is also, of course, one of the concepts that comes back in EUCRA quite a lot, but we also try to do some other work on just resilience. It's, by the way, one of the topics where the EEA is very closely collaborating with the EU team in the international negotiations as well. Just resilience, leaving no one behind when we adapt to climate change, when we create resilience, when we increase our resilience. And one of the, and now I did something wrong, and I don't know if you even can still see me. I clicked on a hyperlink, which was not a good idea. I hope you can still see me. One of the key concepts there is the difference between equality and equity. Just resilience and leaving no one behind is not treating everybody equally. It's making sure that everybody has the same access, that everybody has the same ways of improving, of increasing those resilience. So the equality discussion, I hope we left that behind us as being the way to look at things. And I still like the picture of the umbrella. If you give everybody the same umbrella, nobody will really be protected from the rain and the wind that is going on. All those people with their different needs, they need different solution and not just the same toolkit. I think that's one of the key elements in just resilience. We started our work a few years ago. This was the first big briefing. Of course, in the meantime, we developed that further, and there will be another EEA briefing coming up in 2025, and another ETC technical report towards the end of this year. This one is the one from 23, because those concepts as such are fine, but at some point, we also need to think about how are we going to measure this? What does it mean? It is all in all, sometimes a vague concept. People saying, just resilience is fine, but people don't have the same possibilities already now. So what does it mean? And I think we put quite some efforts now in trying to have information on how you can measure this. And how you can measure this, I'm not going to say that it's just a quantitative indicator set that will solve all your issues, which is, by the way, very seldom the case when it's about climate change adaptation. In most cases, it's a combination of qualitative, descriptive, and quantitative information into indicators that are put in a certain context. And that's the case here as well, but at least we want to give some information on what you can be, what you can use as proxies, what is relevant to look at, what are policies to look at. So from what is just resilience, in the end, we are moving towards which indicators can be used, not which indicators you should use for the moment, but which indicators can be used to facilitate justice considerations in that adaptation process. So that is what is going on for the moment, and certainly is to be continued, and a topic that luckily is not disappearing from the agenda anytime soon. We also said we want to talk a bit about solutions today. And of course, the focus of your project is a lot on insurance, which is an important element, although you can say to some extent that insurance is a risk transfer mechanism that doesn't automatically reduces the overall risks that they are. At the same time, it's of course absolutely true that the insurance sector, insurance company, and everybody who is around that team also is a very important knowledge provider, and knowledge is also a very important measure for adaptation. What we did quite some years ago was creating a taxonomy for adaptation measures, and that was before the word taxonomy was hijacked by the taxonomy on sustainable finance. So now everybody immediately says, oh yeah, but there's the taxonomy. Yeah, the word existed before. What we did is really try to create, like Linnaeus did for the biodiversity, a kind of schema that was inspired by the reporting activities already existing for the water policies, in particular for the Water Framework Directive and a bit for the Floods Directive, but also the reporting activities for the Common Agricultural Policy. If you ask 27 countries to report all their measures, you get so many different types that there is no possibility of making any conclusions structuring them. So especially the Water Framework Directive and in the CAP, they came up with a list on how to structure. And again, you lose some level of detail compared to how you are reporting and structuring it nationally, but you gain that comparability at the European scale, that someone in Croatia understands that a measure that is labeled in a certain way is very similar to what he or she is doing because it's labeled the same way. Or if you're looking for a kind of measure that you're missing and you need inspiration, that at least you know where to look for. Also in the climate change mitigation and energy, there's something like the policies and measures, which is a mandatory reporting, and our key types of measures for adaptation wanted to be the adaptation counterpart for that, but for the moment on a voluntary basis, as it's not mandatory in the governance regulation reported, which is the governance regulation on the Energy Union and climate action, which drives what countries need to report on these things. 5 types, 11 subtypes, 25 specifications. So this is what came out of that, and what we use as a very basic structure on the levels 1 and 2. And of course, you will see that there is an important one in economic and finance that has to do with insurance, but also other risk-sharing instruments, because there's more than the classical insurance as we know it, although this is the audience that knows much more about it than us. But that's the basic thing. There is a third level. I will remove it again, but it is in the slide deck that I guess will be shared, that gives a bit more detail, but this reads a little bit easier. We don't say that you're only doing good adaptation if your measures are including every type or every subtype, but especially when it comes to countries and regions asking us for advice on this, what we most of the time say, have a look and try to classify what you already have and see if it covers all of them. And if you really have gaps in there, try to think if you're missing something. It doesn't mean that it always have to be each and every sub KTM, but if you're really missing in the whole C and D cluster, it might not be sufficient to reduce your risks and to increase your resilience. It started from that national level, and in the wording that is still sometimes the case, but we now applied it on many different occasions, and the same logic is still there. Because also, if you, as a private entity, are looking at your assets, you have certain governance things you can work on, you have knowledge things you can work on, you have certain measures that you can take on the physical level, being them both gray and green and blue or whatever they are. So it works. The only thing we probably have to do for the future is to make sure that our language is more inclusive to also cover these. It's a bit the same, and I will come back to that in a minute, like the adaptation policy cycle and the adaptation support tool. We started that for one audience, but for the moment we have a lot of different versions of that, trying to serve different types of audiences, but the key structure, the key information is still the same. It's again in the 2025 reporting a voluntary part, but we hope that most countries will at least give us one. And it's quite important for us, first of all, for that mutual learning. We still feel that there are a lot of questions about what can I do? I'm making my first plan at level whatever it is, local, regional, national, or cross-boundary for example, the Alpine region and so on. So it's still very important in the mutual learning part, but it's also one of the key parts of the reporting when it comes to what is implementation, what is happening on the implementation part. Good. One of the last things, and tell me on time when I need to stop. I will speed up a little bit. But I was afraid from the translation tool that I will mess it up if I really go in my normal speed. Is a bit about monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. I started in the previous slide saying we use this in the governance reporting, which is the main tool of mandatory reporting we have. There's a lot of terminology here. Monitoring, reporting, and evaluation, monitoring and evaluation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning. I mean, the number of acronyms is maybe telling that it's a field that is developing. And this is the original adaptation support tool reflecting the adaptation policy cycle that was created. And this is really step number 6. And for many, many years as EEA, we used MRE as an abbreviation. We're now slowly moving into monitoring, evaluation, and learning, because the reporting as such is a tool in between, and the learning aspect, because of course after that you go into a new cycle where you again will plan and will try to implement things and try to reach certain goals is quite important. There was the original version. Afterwards, we created the urban adaptation support tool, really looking at what can we give in terms of key documents, key sources, key indicators, case studies or examples that are of relevance for local authorities at really the urban level. And very recently, we published the regional adaptation support tool, part of the mission and adaptation knowledge portal we are responsible for at EEA. And of course, the question you want to answer is, are we on track? That's why you want to monitor. In our case, that's then, is Europe on track with climate change, towards climate change resilience? There's quite some figures out of that. And I think it's really something that is developing. Member states, they report challenges about the immaturity of the systems for tracking the implementation, and especially the whole economic part, the funding, the financing remains an issue. That's still a challenge. There's not really a common methodology to assess costs, and that makes it sometimes difficult to convince people, especially, for example, when it comes to nature-based solutions. What are the costs? What are the benefits? Who bears the cost? Who gets the benefits? When are the costs, and when will you see some of the potential benefits, and so on and so on. But at least half of the member state also indicate progress. So it is something that is very clearly developing. It was in a premature and therefore not really comparable version in the old adaptation reporting as well. And there most of the countries simply said, no, too early. We are planning an early implementation of our national adaptation plan. So MRE is for later. Now, at least that is quickly changing, and actions are happening. This is, I guess, the last one, and I already said most of it. It's a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data that will always be there. Indicators are a bit of a holy grail. Everybody wants a key set of indicators, not too many, easy to monitor, and so on. It's very difficult for the moment, but at least there are some some examples, and let's see what, in the context of the UNFCCC, happens in Belém next year at the next COP, not the one next week, but next year. And yeah, whatever you try to do in this field when it comes to indicators or having an evaluation and so on, your stakeholders are, of course, important. Your own evaluation is just a part of it. Ask your stakeholders how they evaluate what was going on, and you will learn much more. Climate Adapt is where we have all our information available. It's home to the mission knowledge portal, but also the Climate Data Explorer, the Climate and Health Observatory, and everything about EUCRA, much more than the report. There's also a lot of interactive material there. But it also includes country profiles, which is the authoritative information as it's reported by country, sector fact sheets with indicators, resources, all kinds of links, case studies, where we don't want to do the most case studies, not at all. It's a relatively limited set, but it focuses in particular in how case studies develop over time, where the output and outcome as you planned them originally, how's your monitoring going, what are your results over time. So it's we follow up our case studies over time, even if the projects are over and so on. We try to update them and get some information. Of course, it also has the adaptation support tool in all its detail and knowledge overviews, including economic losses, economic tools, and so on. So that is really the last one, and I took too much time, and I'm sorry for that, Amanda, but over to you again.
No problem. Thank you so much, Wouter, for this really informative session. I learned a lot myself, so I hope the rest of the audience as well. And I wanted to give the space to the audience to ask questions to Wouter. No one, then maybe I can ask a question to you, Wouter, because on the European climate risk assessment, we see that for some of the hazards, like for example floods, policies are not that developed yet. What do you think that are actually the current barriers for why there are not so many policies in place to address this hazard, and what do you think that is needed to increase this?
What is certainly not a good excuse is that the knowledge on the physical hazards is lacking. Even for some of the hazards where a few years ago, people would say, yeah, it's very difficult. Think about hail. For a long time, projections about hail were not all going into the same direction. So that was a barrier to act. Even there, much more became clear now. So that's certainly not a good excuse to not have them. Floods is maybe the exception because there exists something. At least there's an EU obligation to create in those 3 different steps, with the preliminary assessment, then the whole mapping of the flood risks, and then finally creating your plan. There is at least something, but I agree that in most cases in practice, this is focusing a lot on coastal and on the big fluvial parts, while we all know that look at the water bombs, whatever the word is a good one or not. I sometimes doubt it, but it's what we understand. It is these huge pluvial events. Those are largely lacking. And the difference there is also that they can happen roughly everywhere, so that they can affect most people. If you live close to a river and you have that place for a while, you know that it varies. You don't have to be flooded, but you know that the water level is varying throughout the year, over different years and so on. But with these pluvial events, yeah, there's certainly some. Also for storms, that doesn't exist, for example. And of course, you can say there's a slight relation to coastal areas, because there the wind has the most possibilities to blow, and then it's broken by all kinds of infrastructure. But nevertheless, all kinds of storms and wind-related issues can happen at many places. So there's suddenly yeah, a lack of what is going on. And then there's a whole group where I think the problem is even much bigger, and that's what about droughts? Because it's so hard to draw a line, both geographically and temporally, where things are happening. And rather than saying, look, it is a fuzzy boundary, the argument is very often, yeah, okay, so it's not possible, so let's not develop something. So that's a group where, although the knowledge is there and you know the trends over time, because the delineation might be difficult, it's also more difficult to create policies when it comes to what kind of products do you want, what kind of national or even supranational interventions you have. How does that work? That cascading and so on. Because where did it start? When did it end? These kind of things remain a difficulty. And again, I think EUCRA does not want to replace the really huge efforts that are happening. If you are a Mediterranean country, you might have different needs in looking at your risks than when you are a Scandinavian country, or if you are a Baltic one. So there are some efforts going on, and we don't want to replace them, but this is to create that unique level playing field, or that equal level playing field at least, where you understand also from each other what is going on.
Amanda, can I ask a question? I couldn't see.
Of course, Mia.
Walter, very nice. It's always nice to listen to you. I'm working in Soteria. I'm a lawyer from Norway, but I'm also a researcher. And having worked with, especially with the municipalities on a long term, we're also sharing insurance loss data, and that's part of the Soteria. So I just want to tell you that it's more not a question, it's more, well, could be a question. What we see over time is that to do the climate adaptation, which is mainly on the municipality level, they are lacking granular data. So they were asking, that's why this communication with insurance started, where you have high penetration, like in the Nordic and France and Spain. So the question was always coming up, like the models are too, on regional level, we cannot really use them. We don't know what to adapt to, because we don't know if it's going to be 2.5 or 4.6 or whatever. So firstly, the problem was like to have accurate, more granular data for risk assessment. That is a constant problem, besides not having the finances on it. So that's something we're looking into, and we know now already from Soteria that it's very little data on that level, and this is what they really want. And it looks like the insurance sector is at least the one that has very accurate data on loss data. And another one is like, what should we, the passivity is also on what should we adapt to? Should we build a 2 meter high flood wall or a 4 meter? And that is making a little bit passive. That's, well, at least something that also comes up very often. Any comments?
One at the beginning. I mean, of course, I understand what kind of measures you have in mind, and then I fully agree with there's a lot going on at the local level. There's no need whatsoever to have a national plan that says how any greening of an area or bringing water in to mitigate the urban heat island effect and so on, how that should be done. That is certainly happening at the national level. At the same time, we might not forget that many of these local practitioners, when implementing solutions, still face relatively old rules that are hampering their work. It's in several countries, also in Western Europe, very difficult to have one hand say, look, we need species that are going to survive in our park, in our street, when it's more dry, and we don't want to waste the water we have all on that if more drought resistant species are available. And at the same time, it's from, oh yeah, no, but you're not allowed to buy them. Or then in practice, the stock of them is almost unavailable, even if it's allowed. So there's a lot to be done and going on at that local level in all of the categories, but there's certainly a lot of enabling conditions that need to be in place. And it's even a bit the same on insurance. And the insurance should do more. Everybody should be insured. The insurance should be more. And then you see that there are certain barriers that are not for them to overcome because they don't create a playing field. So that's maybe the only addition. Don't forget the enabling ones that need to be in place. So the other actors can do their more detailed work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mia. We have time for one more question in case someone else has an additional question for Wouter. Jaroslav, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. And I didn't know whether it's appropriate that another panelist ask question to Walter. Walter, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's always nice and very informative. We haven't prepared that, but I'm going to ask a very tough question. And this is coming from the political priorities of the new European Commission and especially the anticipated European Climate Adaptation Plan. Now, would you share your thoughts about how this plan can be structured and how the key adaptation measures that have been produced and you have presented them could fit into it, and whether those key adaptation measures might be sufficient in order to structure that adaptation plan, the variety of the different interventions. So any thought, and I know that this is very early stage of discussion, what the new European adaptation plan will be, but if you could share some thoughts on that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I honestly still need to listen to the session in the Parliament yesterday with the Commissioner designate. I've seen in the written responses that he said a few things about it, and in the press overview that he came back to it yesterday, but I haven't listened to it or read the details. So this is a personal thing. It's certainly not an institutional reply. That's up to the Commissioner designate, soon to be Commissioner, to talk about. Probably that adaptation plan is a very important next step to do for the EU for many different reasons. First of all, there are some competences that are really with them, and where it's only fair that if they ask not just strategies about coordination and organization of work, but also say, and it would be best if other authorities like countries and so on have a plan, to have a real plan themselves as well. So that's certainly one of the aspects. I think a second element for the moment, there's not much that I can imagine that does not fit into the structure. If for European adaptation plan, these 5 clusters are the most ideal, I'm not going to say that, because there might be less on the practicalities. A bit like Mia said before, things that are happening at local level, they won't be prescribed at the European one. So we might need some more detail in where it really comes a plan for the governance, but also for the economics. What are you going to do in terms of subsidies yourself, in terms of all kinds of grants, in terms of creating instruments? Is insurance only to be allowed to have a 12-month period ahead, or are we going to think creatively about these things? So there will be some focus areas and some other ones that probably will be mentioned more likely. I don't think from our side that there's something not fitting into it, although I can imagine that a huge part, well, no, I cannot imagine. I hope at least, and that's very personal, that a very important focus is on what's going on in the rest of the world and how is that impacting us, and what kind of measures do we have to take there, because there is a real competence and a real need from any other actor to see what the EU is doing. So if that needs them to follow the same structure and be integrated everywhere, probably not the most ideal to give it priority to our partners in the rest of the world. So that's maybe the addition we need for sure over there. But yeah, it's a bit early. EUCRA being the scientific basis or the knowledge basis, that seems to be a given, luckily, complemented by all kinds of other things that are happening, and the policies as they are developing. But yeah, it's a bit early to know exactly what they have in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wouter. Then, given we are already by Jaroslav, I would like to give the floor to you to give us valuable insights from Soteria and PIISA project. And I'm sure that Soteria and the partners that are here on the call today can learn a lot from our sister project. So please, Jara, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Good morning to everybody. It's always a pleasure to speak after Wouter because he set the stage, and I can, skip many of the explanation that I would start with. So I will, in my short talk, I will connect to what Wouter has said in multiple ways. The first one is I will be focusing on the solutions. And this is critically important that the risk assessment and the European climate risk assessment as well really needs to develop the stage for what we can do about the risk that we are facing. So what we can do in order to reduce them. So solution is an important part of the design of risk assessment, as to give the answer to what we can do. The second part, the second point, I will a little bit challenge the voters' statement that insurance is only a financial service and has little to or contributes little to reducing the level of risk. I think the whole presentation here from my side will speak about how to turn insurance into something useful for risk reduction. Although it's not yet there, right? The awareness is raising, but it's paving the way how this might be done. And finally, I will touch also upon how insurance can contribute to adaptation finance and biodiversity finance. So I will be covering a couple of projects, and I'm a little bit biased towards the NATURANCE, which I'm coordinating, the insurance for nature and nature for insurance. But I will cover also the PIISA project towards the second part of my talk. So my talk is less technical. I thought the audience would be less prepared. So if the level is not appropriate for this this audience, I apologize for that. So let me start with a clear observation. The ecosystem services play an immense role for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. So there are a number of ecosystem services that might mitigate the impact of climate risk. So they have an economic value, but there is no price attached to that. And this is visible in a number of ways. For example, on the figure that you see, coral reefs mitigate the impact of the coastal floods. And the same also the mangrove forest. So there is a substantial contribution of coastal ecosystem to reducing the economic damage and also the social burden of the communities living on the coast. This is one example of many of the ecosystem services that have this enormous economic value, but it's not accounted for. On the other side, the ecosystem degradation is also increasing the risk, and many risk assessment take for granted that the flow of ecosystem services will remain constant in the future, which we know it's wrong. So this is not going to happen. So there is a sort of hidden cost of disaster risk coming from the environmental degradation. So insurance might be a way of translate and internalize this value, and I will be talking about how this can be done. So insurance is definitely a way to look at in order to bridge the biodiversity finance gap. The gap has grown to almost $1 trillion of dollars, according to the recent estimates, and this is expression of how poorly we manage our land and how poorly we care for biodiversity and proper ecosystems. Nature-based solution, and this is not new for you. European Union is one of the leader in research and practical implementation of nature-based solution. Europe has invested almost 1 billion euro into a research project demonstrating the values. So if you think of it, the nature-based solution is another mission, the sixth mission, which is not called a mission area, but given the sheer volume of finance driven to nature-based solution, it might be seen as a mission, and the mission would be to recognize, internalize the value of healthy ecosystem and foster the ecosystem restoration. And we have the biodiversity strategy, we have the nature restoration law. So if the nature-based solution can contribute in a cost-effective and cost-efficient way compared to other solutions to reducing the risk, and we have demonstrated that in the recent review article that we have published this year in the Science of the Total Environment, which is the reference number 2. So if there is the scope, so how to do that? So in the NATURANCE project, we have coined the term nature-based insurance and investment solutions that combines the solution aspect, insurance, and the nature-based philosophy of it. And we have not invented this. There's been interesting scheme already implemented, tested in small and larger scale by our partners at the NATURANCE. So you might know the Mesoamerican Reef Insurance Program, which is basically ensuring the coral reef itself, the piece of ecosystem and the services this ecosystem provides in order to protect the coastal properties. So this is an operational scheme that has been tested in a small scale and then extended to the whole Mesoamerican reef region. This is not the only one. There are a number of others. A similar way, there is the mangrove forest parametric insurance in the Pacific regions that operates according to the same principles. That means after a severe disaster strike, there is immediate funding made available in order to restore the coral reef or restore the mangrove forest to be able to continue providing this protection function. So this is the short introduction into what we are doing in the NATURANCE. NATURANCE is a coordination and supporting action started in October 22. So we are roughly 2 years into the implementation, and the main goal is to elaborate the technical, financial, and operational feasibility and performance of the solution, nature-based insurance investment solutions. And the other specific goals that we have is to create connect the different knowledge networks, knowledge communities, organize innovation labs, and elaborate on business cases that demonstrate this value. Right. So in the first place, we elaborate this type of business cases for where this can work, under which situation, what are the preconditions that needs to be fulfilled, and so on. How we are doing that? We have engaged a large number of organizations from basically 4 thematic fields. So we have risk analysts and modelers that are able to demonstrate what is the contribution of ecosystem services in terms of risk reduction. Then we have financial organization. They are looking into the case, judging whether the business case might hold, whether the transaction costs are not too high, or how to reduce those transaction costs. And then we have the regions and the local authorities that are interested in looking into how this might be implemented and boost their transformative adaptation approaches in the jurisdiction. And then we have also advocacy organization at the different levels, advocacy for nature-based solution or ecosystem-based adaptation. And we bring those communities together in order to work on specific cases. We call them innovation labs. So we have 3 cohorts of innovation labs where we put the expert from across those communities, look into specific solutions and elaborate what might be the evidence behind those schemes, how it might work, how it might be rescaled, and so on. So we do that as a coordination and supporting action. We are organizing a number of events, small-scale technical workshops, large-scale festivals, and festivals. We have had the in-person festival earlier this year in May in Vienna. It was really nice. So we've combined in-room discussions, plenary room discussion with outdoor activities and looking into the different proposal for the operational scheme. And eventually we had the walk the talk sessions where we explored the new ideas and so on. We are also working with the citizens, and this is our nature tone. Nature tone is a way of engaging citizens, not experts, but every citizen in activities to start thinking how nature-based solution can change the surrounding environment and how the funding could be harnessed, including through investment or insurance solutions. So just as an short advertiser, the next Innovation Festival that we are going to organize will take place in February from 11th to 13th. It will be completely virtual in this case, and you are all very welcome to attend. And we can also discuss with Soteria to give you some space during the festival to elaborate on your content and what you are interested in. So this is very roughly how it works. So basically we bring the people from different communities together, elaborate on the ideas, and then we have supporting infrastructure from knowledge partners that bring in the evidence from the governance and policy point of view, evidence risk assessment and performance assessment of NBS and these solutions, and eventually dissemination team and capacity building. So the strength of this project is that we have, this enormous pool of knowledge networks, and we are very closely connected to financial networks like ClimateWise, like Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, and a number of others. And this is the roadmap. So we have basically 3 cohorts of innovation labs, 3 innovation labs taking at the same time. And then every 10 months, over the period of 10 months, we elaborate the ideas, foster the discussion, and close the business case with the state-of-the-art evidence on those, and eventually moving forward to another cohort of interesting cases. Right. So how to turn the traditional insurance into something which is really encouraging the risk reduction and helping to build a case for nature-based investment and insurance solution. So starting from the typical case, we have a property that is not protected by insurance. So the value of the property in theory reflects also the level of risk that this property is facing. Unfortunately, we know that the current hazard classification map that we have do not accurately capture the true level of the risk. So this capitalization of the risk exposure into property value might not be as effective as it should be. So we know roughly from the literature that the property values underestimate the level of risk by up to 15 or in some cases 20%. So this is a huge risk that we see at the horizon. And as soon as we realize that the property values need to be recalculated, that might create a financial risk being propagated to the financial sector. And we might see similar situation that we have seen in 2008 with the mortgage loan crisis. The second step is the property price is insured. right? Basically, the insurance capture the compensation and the contingent payment for compensating the losses. It's a financial service. But in this form, in the traditional form, there is little incentive beyond the contract terms how the property owner can be incentivized to take the risk reduction measures at the individual level and protect their properties. The next step is to turn the insurance into something that is really promoting this, passing on the incentives. And that might be done by a number of ways. What is interesting in this term is that a transformation of the insurance into something that is helping also reduce the risk increases the viability of the service of the financial service, right? As the risk is increasing, insurers are withdrawing from certain areas, and this is increasing the financial protection gaps rather than reducing it. So by passing on the incentive to do something more on it, there is investment into sustainability of the insurance cover. So this is critically important to realize. So there are a number of ways how property owners can adapt their property in order to reduce the risk. They might implement green roof, rain garden, permeable pavements. They might plant trees and so on. But of course, this is a localized intervention at the property level might not be sufficiently large in order to reduce the risk. So what we need the property owners to do, we need to especially concentrate at the interventions. So the performance of nature-based solution in reducing the risk really depends on the scale of the application. So in this case, we have the same property situated in the neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood is investing into turning the space into more resilient neighborhood. There are other schemes where the intervention needs to be done upstream rather than downstream. So this is the case where the flood risk can be reduced upstream. Then there is a certain transfer of incentive from upstream to downstream community. We have been working on the first cohort of the innovation labs, and I have a few examples how this is taken into account. So we have been looking, we have completed the first round, first 3 cohorts. We have been looking into UK regulatory environment, especially the new biodiversity net gain legislation. And this is similar to the nature restoration law in the European Union. The regulation basically requires the developer to improve the biodiversity in the land that they have been developing by at least 10%. And that should be really measurable and demonstrable. And although this is not connected to insurance, it provides a nice incentive for the developers to look into the credit trading with the biodiversity credit and connect those credit with the insurance schemes. We have been looking into in the UK how this could be done, how the new regulation could stimulate the property owners and could be incorporated in the UK flood re-alarm scheme. You might know the scheme. It has been quite successful. It has been negotiated bottom up between the government and the Association of British Insurers. It has been set up as a public-private partnership with the aim of reducing the risk on the long term. But unfortunately, we haven't seen those achievements being realized. So there is a little bit critique on how long the flood re might function in this way. Eventually, by connecting this with the biodiversity net gain legislation, they are tangible ways how to use the biodiversity credit in order to reduce the flood risk and incentivize the property adaptation. The other innovation lab was looking into the technical methods, models, and tools to measure the performance. And it was done in the flood-prone region of Limburg. This is one of those that have been affected in 2021. You might remember the large flood in Germany, but the same flood affected also Belgium and Netherlands. And Limburg was one of those areas that have been affected. And in this case, we looked into different ways how to take into account the upstream and downstream benefits and the distribution, and how to adapt risk assessment tools in order to capture those distributions. And the third innovation scheme from the first cohort was exploring the wildfire risk management. So you might have seen that in California, the insurers are gradually withdrawing from the market because the risk is unmanageable for many of them. So many properties remained unprotected. So how does wildfire insurance look like? There's a specific scheme and empirical evidence that the ecological forestry, which is a forestry that is based on certain intervention, like thinning, strategic thinning, prescribed burning, and managed wildfires, how that can reduce the wildfire. So in this case, the nature-based solution consists of certain way of managing the forest. And this intervention can, and has been empirically demonstrated, can reduce the residential insurance premiums up to a half of it in the treated areas, which is interesting. It reduces the insurance premium. This is a clear incentive, but also the reduction of the premium might be fueled back into making the system even more resilient. The other example that we are exploring right now, it's a part of a second cohort, is controlled flooding schemes in Emilia-Romagna. Emilia-Romagna is known as being hotspot of flood risk, and we have seen that in 2023, but also this year. And we have seen that also in 2012. In 2012, there's been a earthquake that has destroyed the lowland drainage facilities. And those facilities are critically important to discharge these lowland areas where the level is below the dike levels of the main rivers like Po River. So once they are out of the business, basically you are unable to drain the territory, and you are increasing the flood risk. We have been working already back in 2012 with the civil protection and with the region on the schemes exploring the controlled flooding. So that means with the limited capacity that you still have, you might divert the flood water into low value agriculture land, rather than high value urban centers which are further downstream. So what you can see on the picture is agricultural land being flooded, and you can imagine that the flood that is sort of induced where it causes less damage is done in order to protect the urban centers which are downstream. And this is the visualization of the city. You need to imagine that there is a city downstream that is being protected by this intervention. So we are looking into there are tangible ways how to do that, and this is grounded in the institutions that are existing in those areas. So there are water boards, similar to the Dutch water boards. In Italy, the water boards are semi-public bodies that are able to collect the taxes, land taxes, based on a very specific and risk-informed plan, classification scheme. So this is a nice vehicle to collect also the premiums. And we're looking into how to turn the existing scheme into a community-based flood insurance. And this model will be connected to the nature-based solution by encouraging the farmers to turn the areas that have been identified as being suitable for controlled flooding, to turn them into more ecologically viable areas. That might be by management practice, by the crops that they plant, and so on. So this is a ongoing instrument scheme, and we have big hopes in being able to demonstrate how this could be done. So basically what we are drawing out of those examples in innovation laboratories, what are the key results that we are working towards to achieve are shared performance metrics. That means how to assess the performance of nature-based solutions and nature-based insurance solutions in order to demonstrate the business case. The design principles, how to design these schemes, insurance schemes, in order to take into account social justice, distributional effect, the unintended consequences, and sustainability of the scheme over the time, and how to use those business cases in order to promote policy reforms across the mission adaptation regions, but also beyond. Right, that has been much about NATURANCE, but there are many other projects like Soteria. There's also PIISA project, and PIISA is doing something similar, piloting innovation solutions for adaptation. This is part of the mission adaptation, the horizontal scheme contributing to building the knowledge and the how-to practical examples. So the specific objective of PIISA is really to develop and promote a climate risk insurance solution, help to reduce the financial protection gap, improve the data collection, sharing, and guidance, and strengthen the regional support. And those objectives are very similar to yours in Soteria, but this is fine. I mean, we really need plenty of people to look into those. So PIISA is not entirely focused on nature-based solution, but nature-based solution is a sort of considered to the extent possible. The project started only 1 year ago, so from the key achievements that have been done there are several horizontal reviews. A review of the insurance penetration, the insurance coverage, in addition to what you have heard from Maria during the first dialogue, the insurance protection gap that is managed by EIOPA and the data they have. This review has updated basically the European assessment from 2017. I think there was a comprehensive assessment about the disaster insurance penetration published in 2017. And PIISA has looked into that and updated it, looking into what are the different characteristics of the existing schemes, how viable they are, what are the requirements, and so on. So I'm not going too much into detail, but there's a interesting mapping coming out of it. The other review that has been done was looking into barriers limiting the demand of climate and disaster risk insurance. And this study is under review by Ecological Economics, but if you're interested, the report is available from the project website. So it looked into a number of behavioral nudges, like what are the factors that prevent the people from or encourage them to take insurance cover. And many of those are really something new compared to what we know. So it's interesting, an interesting reading. The project is also elaborating a number of schemes in different cohorts as well. So in the first place, the project was looking into low-hanging fruits. So looking into insurance schemes that might be further promoted, further elaborated, further analyzed. So it looks into green roofs and the de-risking by insurance of those interventions. It looked also into clay, soil, and home insurance scheme. And it is probably not very well known. There is a significant threat to the properties that are built on clay soil. And because of the different water regimes in those soil, it causes shrinking of the soil, and that causes the physical damage to the buildings. So there are interesting development in terms of insurers looking into how this might be tackled and what kind of insurance coverage might be done. Other schemes that are being worked on is agriculture and crop insurance and wind and trees wind insurance, basically how to absorb the damage both in the forest areas but also urban greenery. So how to cover for those cases by insurance, how to smooth the insurance, make it easier to and adaptable. And another case is forest and fire, developed by AXA Climate, which is similar and connected to what we are doing in NATURANCE. How the forest fire insurance might be modified in order to make it easier, widespread, based on parametric insurance, lowering the transaction cost, and eventually encourage also ecosystem restoration in those interventions. So this has been a very short overview about the different activities, the focus of both project and the yearly achievements. Of course, you are more than welcome to connect to the communities working on those projects, join the forces, or elaborate cases where we could work together. And my last point is we would like to acknowledge the funding for both projects comes from the European Union. And yeah, over to you, Amanda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jaroslav. That was a very nice overview of the two projects, and I think we can also learn a lot from what's happening in both of the projects. So I want to open the floor to the audience to ask questions, because I know that we have representatives here from case studies, but also work packages. So there might be some questions for Jaroslav. Mia.
Okay. Are you ready, Yaro? Okay. To the NATURANCE that everything goes very quick, so I tried to notice something, but there was a couple of things. And the one is that I also learned through working on the EU project Merlin, where we looked at nature-based solution in insurance, that I was heading to with some other partners. The main question that comes up with insurance, having 20 years of experience, is like they say, well, how do we calculate the risk? What does this nature-based solution means? We never heard about it. We have to have some sort of guidance on what type of nature-based solutions. And I worked with Oslo municipality city, and they said, okay, let's make some sort of from gray to green, and just at least have some idea about where do we go from gray to green or blue-green. So that's the first thing. That's the two things I mentioned. What is nature-based solution, and how can we calculate the risk after damage? How much that means? What is the insurance risk? Is how. What are the chances for an occurrence, and how much does it cost? I mean, those two factors. And they don't have anything on that so far. So that's another thing. And you mentioned also that they need to go beyond the contract, the insurance contract. And I'm not sure if I understand that, because I mean, you have to have an idea about if something happens, a damage happens, I know as an insurance company the risk, how much do I have to pay? So if you go beyond the insurance contract, what do you base it on? I mean, it's really a contract between you and as a policy holder and the insurance company, very much defined what you cover and what you don't cover. That's according to the distribution directive. So beyond the contract insurance and what you have as obligation towards your policyholder, you get more into a social, I mean, it's a different kind of aspect. Then you have to pool all the insurance company into some sort of system where they all pay a share, for example. You can do that. And then you're into some sort of mandatory system, which they hate, but which you need on different types of accidents or damages, like third-party liability for cars, for example, where you have this. So I think well, and there was one more thing. It's like, be aware you talked about how you measure it through a mortgage and the banks, because they say, if you're going to have this loan, you need insurance. And what we see that it's very different because the banks doesn't understand insurance. They don't know if you're covered or not. So they just say, oh, you have insurance on your house. Good. But it doesn't cover, for example, in France, flooding, because that's something extra you have to buy. So just beware of it's not that easy to measure it through that channel. So I think that was it. So, and also the upstream factor, that you go beyond the property of the insured and the policyholder. Then you get into the question, well, we only cover our customer, and if you have some sort of common ground to look to, how do we share these sort of responsibilities? And what we had now a new regulation in Norway, which sort of takes this into account, that the municipality can actually require you as the person, the owner of the property, to do something if it is necessary or if there's a possibility of a natural catastrophe. But the municipality, back to the data, they don't know because they don't have the impact data. But that's why we share the insurance loss data, so they can know which vulnerable areas would fit both for nature-based solutions, but also for all the type of preventive measures. So, okay. So what was this a question? Well, the question was particularly on how do you, what you need to elaborate on, what do you mean by going beyond the contract of the insurance? Let's start there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mia. I share those concerns, but let me start a little bit from a couple of steps back. And so the first, all this matter that I presented is a part of business innovation, right? So the insurers are looking into how to make their product more sustainable, financially viable, how to reach out to new market niches and so on. So business innovation is critically important because in many cases, the business cases are disappearing. So I mentioned the flood in Florida, the wildfire in California. Basically, the insurers are withdrawing. There is an empirical evidence. There is a clear signal from the market. So this level of risk we cannot sustain, right? So you need to do something, renew a little bit the insurance, how the insurance works, in order to keep that business financially and economically viable. This is one tendency, and many insurers are looking into that, also as a part of their corporate social responsibility, but also as the really viability of the businesses. There is a second driver that comes from the societal terms, and this was the matter of the first webinar that you had with IOPA. The financial earlier we looked at the insurance as financial service. I can take it or I cannot, right? That I make my own judgment and I decide whether or not it makes sense for me. Now we are turning into considering insurance cover as a right of communities and people, especially because in some cases the insurance might not be affordable. In other cases, it's not available, right? So when you look at the climate adaptation strategy of the European Union, the just resilience discussion, you see there is a gradual shift, right? The pressure that European Commission is exercises on the insurers is a manifestation of the fact that we are turning what used to be a financial service into something which is publicly committed. There is a commitment from the public policy sector to guarantee that there is a protection cover. And this creates a certain, possibility for innovation, how the insurance is done. So what is a nature-based solution? Nature-based solution might be, when you look at the Valencia flood, right, this 800 millimeters of rainfall within 24 hours, there's no nature-based solution can master this flood. So the nature-based solution can lower the impact on the tail of the exceedance curve, right? Can definitely, reduce the frequent and less costly damage. But as we come to the peak, right, the low intensity, high type of impacts, nature-based solution is probably, not the
Yeah.
important, right, measures to do that. But still, we can do across
Unless you have a green roof of the whole city. I mean, I know,
No,
you know.
this is another point, right? But really, when there is a hurricane, and this is
Yeah, yeah.
coming, with 5-6 meter of then the mangrove forest will reduce the impact of the less intense storm surges, but not this big one, right? So there will be a damage. So nature-based solutions are particularly effective at the tail of the exceedance curve, right? When the more frequent and less damaging. This needs to be quantified. So we are looking into the reviews. We have collected evidence. We have produced the review, and in all our reviews, and this is Vicarelli et al., but also our previous reviews. When you look into the published peer-reviewed article, there was no single case where the nature-based solution has not been effective in reducing the damages. So it needs
Yes.
to come into our awareness. There is interest from the insurers. So there are clear ways. We know how it works, and we know that it works in certain situations. It's no one silver bullet for all situations. So it needs to be coupled with something else in order to protect against this Armageddon type of events where the nature is unable to protect itself, not even you.
But I totally agree, and I'm bringing it up because I wanted this discussion.
Yep.
And I think that when we talked to the insurance company in another was a WWF project, they said, well, we know that it's effective. We know that it can cap 25%, 35% of the flooding. Our problem is that we're competing, so we don't know if it's actually going to hit our customer or the competitor customer. So we need, and that was, one of the answers. And the other one was like, we don't again, this effect on they are like one company competing to the other. So we have to go beyond that. But another thing is that we have one of our partners in Soteria that I work with, they have said these are the different database solutions for an insurance company. After talking to insurance companies for a couple of years, this is what you would sort of look at because we have much more open data. We can put them together. We can use and then we know exactly they know the risk because they have the data on this area who in my portfolio are at risk. So what they do is like if you go to this property, you need to have this type of nature-based solution, and it's going to save you this much. And this company just made a 3 years contract with one of our associated partners to really dig into this. So that could be interesting for you to look at. So,
Absolutely. And we have many cases where the insurers have already implemented those solutions, right?
But this goes down to the really smaller, traditional that, not the big Swiss Re, Allianz, the one that has researchers and it's more on the direct smaller scale that you see the direct insurance companies who doesn't have the resources and the thinking in place yet. So I think that's where they're going. So I think I'll make you in contact with that. That would be
please. So just to wrap up, there are even some cases where the insurers are more demanding, and right, they say, okay, so I could lower the premium if if the saving is used in order to protect the whole area, right?
That's what they're doing. It's just then we are into the maintenance part.
Right.
Because they usually it's like, and it's the same thing with we see with the municipalities, very fancy, looks very great. And then there's not enough money for the maintenance for the operational part. So that's another thing that you have to put in, have to consider.
Yeah.
So they are looking at, can we do some sort of, at least on the industry and SME part on the insurance, some longer, like a 3-year contract. So we, you know, getting to test, getting to get the more data on this, what type of risk is it really as an insurance risk, etc. So yes, we're going there, and it's very important to have these tight connections with insurance company to test these questions, I think.
And this is what we are doing. I
That's
see
it.
Paulina has her
Yeah,
hand
indeed.
raised.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Mia.
Yes.
I would also hand
Thank
over to Paulina, and then I have another question afterwards in the chat for Jaroslav.
Okay,
Paulina,
I
please
will
go
be
ahead.
short. I will be very short. You gave some very interesting examples in the end of your presentation, but I didn't get it how this measures nature-based solution on the local level are what's their role in terms of insurance? Is risk reduction in order to be lower the premium, or something else? And what if there is no solutions on the individual level? As you already mentioned, some of the solutions maybe could be mainly on the upstream level, and what in this case could be offered in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So you are referring to the scheme that I presented towards the end from the PIISA project. Not all are looking into nature-based solution. They are basically developing the cases for extending insurance cover for certain hazard and informing the transformative adaptation policies in the regions that benefit from the mission adaptation. So it's basically a business thinking, business innovation thinking for those regions to think of, and exploiting also the new climate information. For the second part of your question, how to do this when a single intervention at the property size is not sufficient. So we call them community insurance schemes. The community might be basically you bundle the premiums for all members of community and connect them with an intervention that is done offsite, right, upstream in the area in order to reduce the risk downstream. This is the case that I presented also, the controlled flooding, right? You cannot reduce the flood water when it comes downstream to the city, but you can reduce it upstream. You can spread it over the agriculture fields and so on. There are a number of interesting schemes already existing. Some of them are payment for ecosystem services. Some others are connected to disbundling the property rights. In Italy, for example, we have a scheme which is called servitude to flood. That means you are not expropriated in order to create areas that can accommodate flood water. So you keep the property of the land, but you need to accept that your property will be flooded, right? So there is a regulation, a regional regulation that imposes this obligation against the compensation. So it's again, it's a fine, a different way of imposing certain obligation, not expropriation, where the whole property would go to the public hand. It's a partial expropriation. So it's a expropriation of certain rights connected to your land, and this might be used for the flood protection. So this is more regulatory command and control instrument. But we have voluntary schemes, and this is connected to insurance, where the farmers can accept the damage against compensation and can turn the agricultural land into more ecological, valuable lands. So basically, the community insurance works that there's a contract made on behalf of all properties that are covered, and this aggregate contract is creating certain funds in terms of investment, in terms of premium reduction, can which can be used in other places upstream in order to reduce the exposure of the downstream areas. So there's a huge potential for those solutions, and we are exploring several of them. Also, the wildfire has some features of community insurance, right? It's not single property, but also the community protections against wildfire. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Pauline.
Yes,
hope
thank
so.
you.
Super, thank you. Then there's one question in the chat from Quentin. Do you want to ask it yourself, Quentin? To open the floor.
Yes, hi. Yes, I'm sorry, thank you for the presentation. The question.
Oh, your microphone is
still mute.
yes. Otherwise, I can ask the question for you.
Is it better now?
No.
Can you hear me? No.
Yeah, great. Perfect.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes, sorry. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I'm an underwriter at AXA Climate, and I also work for the PIISA, so I see all the links, so thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Yes, I was thinking about what you said when you said that NBS could be quite efficient for low severity and high frequency events, but has little to no significant impact for high severity events. And then how can you use it for parametric insurance? Because to my experience, parametric insurance is often more suitable for high severity events, and then implementing NBS solution will have little to no impact in the premium pricing. Because you can just put a higher deductible, and then the impact of NBS might be not seen. So we are also thinking about this question in PIISA, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Parametric insurance is not a silver bullet for everything. Parametric insurance brings other problems. I mean, it basically simplifies the transaction cost, right? It's much easier to determine whether there is a damage compared to indemnity claims and settlement. Parametric is very easy because based on the pre-established threshold, you can determine whether there is a case or not for the payment. It's still based on a fully fledged risk assessment, right? You need to establish the connection between the threshold that you are using for the parametric insurance and the impact and so on. But it also brings in a number of ethical issues. So your property might not be affected and you are benefiting from the parametric insurance. It also brings some social justice issues to what extent the use of resources is justifiable in this context and so on. So mostly parametric insurance is simplifying the transaction, but within certain governance constraints. Parametric insurance can be connected to events along the exceedance curve, different events. Of course, they are most prominent, I mean, for the hurricane type of catastrophic damages, because you can determine simply the intensity of the hurricane, and that's the triggering factor. It's easy. But parametric insurance can be applied also for less intense events in a meaningful way. It's a part of the business innovation that you are looking into, and how to deploy your information and the mechanisms that you can use to trace down the impact and the intensity of the events and deliver on the value. Parametric insurance can be used also for micro insurance in the agriculture sector in the global world. Or as soon as you have certain drought conditions, you might give certain access to insurance and immediate help that for the farmers to survive these tough conditions. So it's I would question your point. It's only connected to the high intensity and low probability type of event. It's basically parametric insurance is about reducing the transaction cost, and you can apply it to different contexts.
Yeah, it could, but for the same covers for small low severity, often it's not competitive against indemnity because it's more expensive due to the development cost, etc. And most of the time for small events, it's not worth it to go for parametric because it's too expensive. So I would say it's not competitive for small loss, and so even for there is also issue with B2C where customers are too small to fit also parametric constraints. And
I think it's again, it depends on whom you want to protect and how you want to protect it, right? You might really use the parametric insurance also for protecting relatively modest losses for the most vulnerable, right? There's no specific case for which you would say, okay, so there's a threshold of the intensity which makes parametric insurance much better than indemnity insurance. So I would question that, right? It's really the objective of your scheme that determines what is the best way out to measuring and triggering the insurance cover.
Okay, yeah, I agree. But to my experience, the only ones when we can do that is thanks to philanthropic fund. Otherwise, it's not
that's fine,
sustainable, economically sustainable. So yes and no. I mean, but okay.
So we are looking into ways of providing insurance cover, right? As a part of the public good, right? We are not looking at the insurance only whether this is a profitable financial service.
Yeah.
So this is the clear distinction. So if you are looking at the insurance as the public good, right, then you're looking into how to deliver that public good for the most vulnerable and how to trigger, right, how to make it manageable. And the parametric insurance is perfectly fine for that case as well, right?
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin and Yaya. Given we have like 5 minutes left, I first of all really would like to thank Wouter and Jaroslav for this really interesting presentation. And I want quickly, therefore, to share my screen and to do a small survey. If you would like to fill the survey in on how you did actually like the session, which topics we can cover in the future, that would help us a lot. So I will give you 1 minute to scan it, and then you can also fill it out a bit later. And then, well, as what we mentioned at the very beginning, is that this climate resilient dialogues is a series that are following each other up, and where we're bringing experts like Jaroslav and Wouter on the table to give the last insights. And we have a next session planned December the 11th, which will be on public-private collaboration, where we have speakers Roland Nussbaum and Alexander Shushenko, which is also part of our Soteria consortium. Let's see. Sorry. So we are very much looking forward to also to invite you to this last session, and the details will be shared very soon. Now, one last ask that we have is whether we can make a picture of the people who were here today for our communication purposes. So I would like to ask people who would like to be included to turn on your camera, and then we can make a screenshot and share that for communication purposes. And if not, you can. I see people dropping off, so that's clearly a no. Okay, let me. Okay, super. Thank you. Super, and thank you so much. And again, thank you for the speakers and for the rest of the audience to be here. We hope that you enjoyed it. We will share the materials with all of you, so you can also share it with your colleagues who might be interested. And I also encourage the colleagues of Soteria to take contact with Jaroslav and Wouter in case you have questions. You know that NATURANCE and PIISA are our sister projects. So this is definitely not the last time that we speak with each other. Thank you so much and have a lovely Friday.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.